Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, following the 3 H's of the channel and all that good stuff. And in this video, it's all about Romania, and it's gonna get strange, scary, and weird. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's go to Romania. Thank you for watching. When I was just a kid, maybe 8 years old or so, I was on a trip to Romania to visit my grandparents and relatives who lived in a village in the mountains. One day, we went to visit an aunt of my mother and we stayed for a few hours. I think we arrived at her house at 6 p.m. and returned around 8 or 9 p.m. When we returned to my grandparents' house, there was a very strong storm, and I remember I saw the moon, but it was different. It was bigger, and it was a more grayish color than normal. And at one point, lightning struck this moon, and it had kind of a red lightning, a weird aura around it. I don't know how else to describe it. I mentioned it to my mother while we were coming back, but she ignored me. Once we got to my grandparents' house, we went to sleep, and strange things began to happen there. I woke up in the middle of the night. The storm was still going on. I looked out the window, and I saw two shadowy figures walking in a fixed point. It was not sleep paralysis, since I could move, and I was trying so hard to shake my mother awake, but she didn't wake up. Nobody did. I looked at the time, and it was 1 in the morning, and I was too scared to actually leave the room, so I went back and hid under the covers until I could fall asleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to my mother and grandparents, but again, they ignored me. My grandfather said that nothing had happened and not to worry, although later on, he went into the room and took out his shotgun or rifle. I don't remember which, and the only thing I know is that we left the same day at noon. My mother had planned to stay for a few days. To this day, I don't know what that was. I don't know if it was some kind of spirits, some kind of aliens, or demonic, but I remember what I saw perfectly. I have nothing better to do until I go to the gym, so here goes. I was 7 years old in 2003. I was living with my mom and dad in the city, but we are originally from a really rural town out on the plains in Teleorman. We were visiting my grandma for the summer, and her house is not great. It's a one-story old peasant house, but despite that, I did have some very fond memories there, and I still hold that place somewhere in my heart today. But during this particular time, I was there having great fun with the other kids in the little village. We were playing on the plain, biking, swimming, almost drowning, in the Danube River. 2 weeks in my summer vacation, Grandma's cousin dies from a heart condition that she had for quite some time and had been living with. The whole village is distraught because older folk remember that she was born with the right condition to become a moroi after death. The local superstition, at least in my area of the country, I have heard it varies, says that if a child is born with an umbilical cord wrapped around the neck, after death it will turn into a moroi. At the time, it was a tad silly, if you ask me. Grandma's cousin was born like this, and the older people in the village were losing their minds and saying that she needs to be staked before the burial or she will turn and come for her relatives. Grandma and her other cousin say, "Screw that, because it's barbaric, and we're living in the 21st century now. Another tradition here is to keep the deceased body for 3 days before burying it. They keep it in the house. I don't really know why. It was during this that stuff started to happen. It became really eerie that even me as a kid who was just playing around all day started to pay attention to and ask what the hell was going on. A quick disclaimer before I continue. I was 7 and didn't understand much, and the whole village in the year of our Lord 2023 still doesn't have proper electricity and running water, so you can imagine what kind of people and what kind of mentality that they have there. But even looking in hindsight as an adult, I still can't help but shudder at how many coincidences that appear to happen to be very similar to folklore and very similar to the supernatural. One day, after the priest did the ritual for the deceased, my grandma's other cousin, who was the sister of the deceased, comes to our home and is scared out of her mind. She says that when she went back home the previous night, the body was missing. She went into the yard to look for it. She called on one of her neighbors, and when they went into the house after looking around, the body was back. She also said that she has had dreams of her deceased sister. Both my grandma and her go to the priest, and they decide that, screw tradition, they're going to do the burial early. The old dudes and the babushkas are like, steak, but they still refuse. 3 days after the burial, things are okay, and I'm having fun. And one night, I invite one of my village friends to come over and play at my grandma's. My grandma goes to sleep. She goes to bed early, and we continue to play. It's getting darker. It was around 9 p.m., I think. We decide to listen to the radio. Suddenly, I see the cupboards in the living room start to shake a bit. I think, oh no, it's an earthquake. The thing is, only the cupboards are shaking, and it gets more violent. The dog is barking like crazy outside. I forgot to mention, it started barking ever since the burial, for whole nights and hours on end. Even Grandma was tired of it. I hear the pots that we use for cleaning and the brooms falling over outside. The windows start to vibrate. Now, looking back, I was a dumb kid, so I wasn't associating these bizarre happenings with actually being haunted. Me and my friend were more perplexed than scared at first. Then it gets real. The barking reaches a crescendo, and then I hear our dog. It's a wolf shepherd mutt mix, something like that. But it's fighting something outside the house. Then it gets really quiet. Now, both of us are actually shitting ourselves. We think some animal has killed our dog, and it has to be pretty big and pretty fierce to do the mud in like that. The cupboard starts shaking and falls over. My friend loses it and takes off. I do the same, leaving my sleeping grandma alone and running to my friend's house like a little bitch. Looking back on that, if you couldn't tell, I'm not proud of that at all. You never leave the elderly behind, 7 years old or not. I return the next day after sleeping over. Our yard is a mess. I meet up with my grandma, who says that she needs to take our dog to the vet because he's injured. He has shallow teeth and claw mark injuries all over his body. She also says that the house is a mess and the windows from the living room got smashed in. At this point, even I as a kid realize how serious this situation is getting. Not even 2 days after these events, my great aunt, the sister of the deceased, now haunting us, falls very ill. They take her to a regional hospital where they keep her because apparently she caught some kind of respiratory disease suddenly in the summer. Unlike her sister, she was very healthy, very active. Another few days pass, and the news is getting graver, not good. Her condition is deteriorating fast, and the doctors don't know what's going on or what her illness even is. The old people in the village say that it's her sister trying to take her to the other side. And from here, you can picture the whole village gathering together like it's some medieval Romanian moment in the year of our Lord 2003 at the time. All the important men, the priests, the school teachers, the mayor, the police officer. They have council in the local gym. I would later learn that they did this because everybody needs to keep their mouths shut, since what is about to happen is, to nobody's surprise, illegal. In the middle of the day, they gather a posse. No torches and forks, since it would be a tad silly, only shovels. They take a few sharp stakes and they go to the cemetery. Me and the local kids follow, even if the adults tell us off. They dig up my dead and now decomposing relative. They break the lid on the coffin, and the priest starts chanting. He's chanting Orthodox prayers and chucking holy water, while two men fix the stake to hammer it in. When it goes in, there's this sound, like a balloon popping and losing air. And a few seconds later, we hear this long, piercing wail that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. This is not any animal that I know. Then they bury her again, and the priest continues doing the prayers and the rituals. Then we head back. Not even 2 days later, my grandma's cousin turns up, having miraculously recovered in no time. The local folklore legends are reinforced. Years passed, and I forgot about the experience until a friend in college mentioned something similar happening in his village. The same course, only this time being in the late 2000s. Nobody wanted to do the ritual, and the moroi's victim was getting closer to death. They were in intensive care. Again, the same respiratory problems. A lone villager went during the dead of the night and staked the body, and in a week the victim recovered. In this case, though, he did not have the support of his community, and he actually faced charges because unearthing and mutilating a corpse is obviously very illegal. The TLDR is that unfortunately, the actual folklore vampires are not cute. They're not people who are romantic and just want to bite you on the neck. A lot of times, they're dead relatives seeking company in the afterlife. The modern vampire is from Bram Stoker's Image, and he took inspiration from even older pulp writings that may or may not have been inspired by Vlad the Impaler. Still, looking back at the series of events, they are really strange. Even if you don't have a drop of belief in the supernatural, it's easy to see how the people out there, isolated people, would produce these kind of stories from a few too many convenient bizarre coincidences. But both my grandma and her cousin are still alive to this day. I have a story, and I'm looking for some answers. Before I start, some relevant info would be that I'm from Romania, so this isn't going to be a skinwalker or a wendigo. We don't have those here. But anyways, let's get to it. I was probably a kid, 9, 10 years old. I had some paranormal phenomenon, ghosts and the like. Nothing super serious or threatening. But one day, I start to see something else, and getting a sensation of dread mixed with curiosity whenever I do. It starts as a distant shadow, always hiding somewhere behind a corner, almost always out of sight. I brush it off at first. Everyone says that demons and ghosts aren't real. As time goes on, it gets closer to me. I start seeing it in broad daylight, not just in the shadows. This goes on for a couple of years. I tell my family and friends, but they all just say that I have an overactive imagination. One day, I managed to see it clearly. It's only a pair of red, disembodied eyes floating around. At nighttime, or in the shadows, there's a contour to it, but it's very blurry and hard to see, sort of like a penumbra. The eyes, though, from the moment that I first see them, they remain clearly visible. They're roughly the size of DVDs, just a little bit smaller. They're always glimmering, always just out of sight, and ready to bolt if I notice them, which is quite often. It doesn't seem threatening, so I start ignoring it. Fast forward a few more years. I'm 14, and I'm still seeing it almost daily. An older friend, who's about 20, tells me that he and some good buddies went to a huge hole outside of town to steal sand with a tipper lorry during the night. It's on private property, but it's not fenced in, and the hole is there because the owner digs it up to sell sand. And if you're wondering why sand, we use it in concrete, and there's been a bit of a housing boom in the area, but a lot of people are unable to afford building materials, especially proper ones, so they unfortunately sometimes resort to stealing. But while at the hole stealing sand, they say that something attacked them during the night. They abandoned the lorry and ran for their lives. He describes a pair of red eyes glinting and running through the darkness. I can't bring myself to tell him about my sightings, but I feel a shiver go up my spine. Being the dumbass that I was, and still am, I went there during the day to see if I'd find anything. No tipping lorry. They probably went back for it by this time. But I find tire tracks in the mud and huge footprints. They look like a dog's, but they're elongated, and they're twice the size of my own feet, so likely not a dog. I hear a voice whispering from far away when I approach the holes. I don't know what to do, so I turn and run home. These sightings become more common after this, but something changes. I'm beginning to feel an urge to follow the creature, but I manage to fight it back. One day, I do decide to follow it and see where it would lead me. This was a bad idea. My property is big, and we have an old stable that we don't use anymore. The creature leads me behind it. I realize that nobody would hear me if I screamed there. Or worse yet, they wouldn't even think to look for my body there for a long time. I turn and run back inside, convinced that this creature doesn't have anything good in store for me. I decide to go to the priest and ask for help. This was very much pre-internet in our area. I tell him everything, and I ask him to come bless our house. He just laughs awkwardly and tells me that there's, quote, nothing to be scared of, but I can tell that he's worried. He blesses me in the church and tells me that I'm safe now, but the blessing was half-assed. He didn't do it right. I see the creature again the same night. I decide that I can only count on myself now. I have to save myself because nobody else will. I grab a hatchet. I wait outside as the night falls for the creature to show up again. It appears. I follow it for a little while, but eventually I stop. I yell after it, provoking it to come out into the open and attack me if it has the balls. It does. It tries to attack me, but I manage to throw the hatchet at it. There's no yelp or sound whatsoever, but I can see where I hit it. I'm expecting to be jumped and killed, but instead it turns and runs away. I keep seeing it for a while, but I don't feel the urge to follow it anymore. I also make sure to always have something on me whenever I go out. A hatchet, a knife, any kind of weapon. I keep provoking it to attack me when I see it, but now it always runs away. I stop seeing it after a while, but I still hear my neighbors talking about it. Now they're beginning to see it. That's basically it. It's just one of the many supernatural and paranormal things I've had happen to me. But this is one of the only ones that I have no idea what it could be. This thing is still around. I've seen it recently while driving on a dirt road near the sand holes, but it never approached me again. What do you think it could be? Did you ever see anything similar? Anything at all like this? Some other information that might be helpful is you might be thinking, have I tried asking elders, older people? But no one knew anything when I tried. My grandpa was the oldest in the area, and he told me about a great many other things. But on this one, he said that he has no idea either. He's always honest with me, sometimes so brutally, because he didn't really give a shit about offending or scaring anyone, so I believe him. So it either came here, appeared, or was summoned shortly before I started seeing it. All of the other people that have seen it claim they started to see it around the same time as I did. A detail that I forgot to include is that others think it has something to do with those sand holes I mentioned, since most of the sightings happened there, and the holes being dug also coincide with its appearance. I'm not sure about that though. The holes are usually no more than 5 meters deep, so I don't think they could have disturbed anything in the earth. There also used to be a cemetery where my neighborhood is. The town is nearly 700 years old, but the holes are far away, and there's zero chance that the cemetery extended to there. Someone claims that they managed to find some old maps of the town that showed the cemetery, but they never showed them to me, so I don't know. They even tried to claim that the cemetery ended around my property, but I'm quite sure that they were just trying to scare me and get a rise out of me. And I've had another experience since I'm here. I guess it was more of a ghost, but it's usually my go-to story when people are talking about it. So me and some friends were playing hide and seek one summer. It was summer break, and we decided to do it at night, obviously because it's more fun. So we went to an abandoned house nearby. There's quite a few in our town. Either the families moved and didn't manage to sell the property, or they started building and ran out of money and had to abandon the project. The house and the property itself was pretty big. There was a tall concrete fence that was encircling it, but it was easy for us to jump over. Besides the house, there was also a well and a stable on the property. I decided to hide in the stable's attic. It was dark and looked scary, so I figured my friends wouldn't want to look for anyone there. There was no ladder, but I managed to climb up there. I watched my friends look for each other, and everyone was found until I was the only one left. I was waiting for them to give up and tell me to come out, which would have been soon, since someone entered the stable searching for me, but they didn't think I'd hide in its attic. I had my back to the attic, looking out into the courtyard through gaps in the planks of wood. As I'm waiting, I start to feel a chill run down my spine. I turn around, and I see a bride, a young bride, hung by one of the wood beams that crisscrossed above me. I started to yell and jumped out of the attic in fear. I've seen ghosts before this point, but at least for me, it doesn't get easier or less scarier. I didn't get a good look at the bride. I only managed to see her dress and the pale skin before I bolted. I told my friends. They laughed at me. But then I told them to come with me, and the laughter stopped. One of them eventually did, though, so we climbed back up in the attic. The bride was gone, but what we did find was a cut noose still attached to the beam that I saw her on. The next day, we went around that neighborhood and asked if anyone knew anything. An older man told us that the bride hung herself in the stable a long time ago because she was forced by her parents into marrying someone that she didn't love for money. What gave us chills was that we never told him that it was a bride. We just said the ghost of a girl. I've had a lot of things happen to me, but these are some of the weirdest and scariest. So, what'd you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? Or do you have a suggestion for a country or a state or somewhere you'd like to see a video on? You can do so by posting in the comments or emailing me your story. And in the description is where you'll find the email address as well as a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. But just watching the video, liking and subscribing and commenting is great too. It's very helpful. And with that, I hope you had a good week, a good weekend, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching, and thank you for pulling up a stump.